Picture this. It's 1880 in the unforgiving territory of New Mexico, where the desert sun beats down mercilessly and human dignity is often traded like cattle. In a world where women were considered property and foreigners were treated as less than human, one young woman's story will challenge everything you think you know about freedom, courage, and the price of independence. This is the story of Amina, a 17-year-old girl sold into servitude by her own blood, who would discover that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. If stories of survival, courage, and freedom matter to you, hit that subscribe button and stay with us. This one will stay in your heart. And sometimes, the words that change your life forever come from a stranger who sees your worth when no one else will. What you're about to hear isn't just a tale of survival in the Wild West. It's a testament to the unbreakable human spirit and the revolutionary idea that no person, regardless of their circumstances, belongs to anyone but themselves. The dust kicked up by the wagon wheels settled slowly in the scorching New Mexico heat as Amina pressed her face against the rough wooden slats, watching her uncle Rashid shake hands with a man she'd never seen before. At 17, she understood enough English to catch fragments of their conversation, but her uncle had made it clear. Her opinion didn't matter. She's strong, works hard, won't give you trouble, Rashid was saying, his Arabic accent thick as he gestured toward the wagon where Amina sat. Clean girl. Good for housework, field work, whatever you need. The man examining her like livestock was Samuel Garrett, a rancher whose reputation preceded him even into the immigrant communities of Santa Fe. His weathered face bore the permanent scowl of someone who viewed everything and everyone as either useful or disposable. His cold gray eyes assessed Amina with the same detachment he might use to evaluate a horse. She speaks English? Garrett asked, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. Enough, Rashid lied smoothly. Amina spoke it well, better than he did, but admitting that would only invite questions about why she wasn't speaking for herself. The truth was more complicated than either man cared to acknowledge. Amina's parents had died in a cholera outbreak 6 months earlier, leaving her in the care of an uncle who saw her as nothing more than a burden to be monetized. The arrangement with Garrett would net Rashid a prime piece of grazing land and 50 head of cattle, a fortune that would set him up for life. What's her name again? Garrett asked, though Amina suspected he was already thinking of her as just the girl. Amina, Rashid replied, but you can call her whatever you want. She answers to anything. The casual dismissal of her identity struck Amina like a physical blow. She'd watched her parents die, buried them with her own hands, and now the last person who shared her blood was erasing even her name. The hot tears that threatened to fall were quickly blinked back. Crying would only confirm their assessment of her as weak. Garrett nodded, apparently satisfied. All right then. Got yourself a deal, Rashid. The handshake that sealed her fate lasted 3 seconds. 17 years of life, reduced to a business transaction in the New Mexico dust. As Rashid walked away without so much as a goodbye, Amina felt something die inside her chest. Not hope, exactly, because hope required the possibility of better days. What died was the last connection to who she used to be. The girl who'd helped her mother tend their small garden, who'd learned to read by firelight, who dreamed of perhaps teaching children someday. That girl was gone. Get down, Garrett commanded in English, his tone already establishing the dynamic between them. And don't make me repeat myself. Ever. Amina climbed down from the wagon on unsteady legs, her few possessions clutched in a cloth bundle. The ranch stretched out before her like a brown ocean, endless, empty, and hostile. The main house was a low adobe structure that seemed to squat against the landscape, while scattered outbuildings suggested the kind of hard, endless work that would now define her days. You'll sleep in the back room, Garrett said, pointing to a small addition behind the kitchen. Up before dawn, work until dark. You cook, you clean, you do whatever needs doing. And you keep your mouth shut unless I ask you something direct. The room he showed her was barely larger than a storage closet, with a narrow cot, a cracked mirror, and one small window that looked out onto the chicken coop. The walls were adobe, thick enough to muffle sound, which, Amina would later realize, was not accidental. That first night, lying on the thin mattress and listening to the coyotes howl in the distance, Amina made herself a promise. She would survive this, whatever it took. She would endure until she could find a way out, or until the desert claimed her. But she would not break. She couldn't have known then that survival would mean more than just enduring Garrett's demands and his wife Martha's cold indifference. It would mean weathering the casual cruelty of neighbors who referred to her only as Garrett's foreign girl, as if she had no name, no history, no humanity beyond her utility. The work was relentless, cooking for the ranch hands, cleaning the house, tending the vegetable garden, washing clothes in the creek that ran behind the property. Her hands, once soft from her mother's careful attention, became rough and scarred. Her back ached constantly from bending over washboards and hauling water. But worse than the physical toll was the slow erosion of her sense of self. Weeks blended into months as Amina learned to navigate Garrett's moods, Martha's bitter complaints, and the ranch hand's mixture of pity and contempt. She became invisible, a shadow moving through their lives, necessary but unnoticed except when she failed to anticipate someone's needs. The only times she felt truly alive were in the early morning hours, before anyone else woke, when she would step outside and watch the sun paint the desert in shades of gold and red. In those moments, she would whisper her own name, Amina, just to hear it spoken aloud, to remember that she still existed as more than just a pair of working hands. But even those small moments of peace were numbered, because Samuel Garrett was a man who believed that owning something meant controlling every aspect of it, and he was beginning to look at his 17-year-old property with eyes that made her skin crawl. 3 months into her servitude, Amina learned that there were worse things than endless work and casual cruelty. She discovered this on a sweltering August evening when Martha had gone to visit her sister in town, leaving Amina alone at the ranch with Samuel. She was washing dishes in the kitchen when she felt his presence behind her, closer than necessary, his breath heavy with whiskey. "You know, girl," he said, his voice different, thicker, more dangerous. "You're not so bad looking when you clean up." Amina's hands stilled in the soapy water. Every instinct told her to run, but where could she go? The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and they all saw her as Garrett's property anyway. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, and she had no horse, no supplies, no money. "I've been good to you," Garrett continued, his hand falling on her shoulder with possessive weight. "Fed you, housed you, kept you safe. Time you showed some appreciation." The next few minutes blurred together in a haze of terror and resistance. Amina fought, clawed, kicked, screamed until her throat was raw. But Garrett was twice her size and fueled by a sense of absolute ownership. When it was over, she lay crumpled on the kitchen floor, her dress torn, her spirit more broken than her body. "You tell anyone about this," Garrett warned, adjusting his belt, "and I'll make sure you disappear into that desert. Nobody would even look for you. You understand me, girl?" Amina nodded, not trusting her voice. She understood perfectly. She was alone in a way that went beyond physical isolation. She was invisible, disposable, without protection or recourse. That night, she sat in her small room and considered the bottle of lye soap she used for laundry. It would be quick, she thought, quicker than trying to survive whatever other horrors Garrett had planned for her. But something, stubbornness, maybe, or the echo of her mother's voice telling her stories of strong women who endured, kept her from reaching for it. Instead, she began to plan. If you're still here, it means this story speaks to you. Tap like so YouTube knows more people need to hear stories like Amina's. The next morning, Amina rose before dawn as always, but her movements were different, more careful, more observant. She noted which ranch hands might be sympathetic, which neighbors occasionally showed her basic human courtesy, what supplies she could gather without being noticed. Her opportunity came 3 weeks later, when Martha announced she was going to spend 2 weeks helping her pregnant daughter in Albuquerque. The ranch hands would be moving cattle to the northern pastures, leaving Amina alone with Garrett for days at a time. "This is it," she whispered to herself that first night, gathering what little food she could carry, along with one of Martha's old riding skirts and a worn pair of boots that might actually fit her feet. She had no clear destination, but anything was better than staying. She made it 4 miles before Garrett caught up with her. The beating that followed was methodical, designed to break her will without damaging her too badly to work. As she lay gasping in the dirt, Garrett's voice was almost conversational. "You belong to me, girl. Bought and paid for. The sooner you accept that, the easier this gets." But even as her body screamed in pain, something in Amina's core remained unbroken. Maybe it was her mother's stubborn blood, or maybe it was simple spite, but she looked up at Garrett through swollen eyes and managed to whisper, "I don't belong to anyone." The words earned her another kick to the ribs, but they also did something else. They reminded her who she was beneath the fear and the pain. She was Amina Hassani, daughter of Fatima and Ahmed, granddaughter of storytellers and survivors. She had been sold, but she had not been conquered. The months that followed were dark ones. Garrett's abuse became routine, as predictable as the sunrise and almost as inescapable. Martha, upon her return, noticed the change in her husband's attention to the girl, but said nothing, whether from fear, indifference, or complicity. Amina never knew. But even in the darkest moments, Amina held onto that core of defiance. She began to steal small moments of dignity wherever she could find them. She would braid her hair in the traditional patterns her mother had taught her. She would hum the lullabies she remembered from childhood. She would practice writing her name in the dirt with a stick, erasing it before anyone could see. And she never stopped looking for a way out. Her chance came on a November morning when a stranger rode up to the ranch asking for directions to the territorial marshal's office in Santa Fe. The man was tall and lean, with prematurely gray hair and eyes the color of winter storms. He moved with the careful economy of someone who'd seen violence and preferred to avoid it, but wasn't afraid of it either. "Name's Ethan McCallister," he said, dismounting from a paint horse that looked as travel-worn as its rider. "Wonder if I could trouble you for some water and directions." Garrett emerged from the barn, his manner immediately shifting to the false friendliness he reserved for white men who might have influence. Course. "Girl," he barked at Amina, who was hanging laundry nearby. "Get this man some water. The good water from the well." As Amina hurried to comply, she felt McCallister's eyes on her. Not the predatory assessment she'd grown accustomed to, but something else, a sharp, evaluating look that seemed to catalog the fading bruises on her arms. The way she flinched when Garrett raised his voice, the careful distance she maintained from everyone. "Thank you kindly," McCallister said when she brought him the water, his voice gentle in a way that made her chest tight with something she'd almost forgotten, the feeling of being treated like a human being. When their eyes met over the tin cup, Amina saw something that shocked her, recognition, not of her specifically, but of what she was enduring. This man had seen suffering before, and he knew the difference between hardship and cruelty. "You take care now," McCallister said to her directly as he prepared to leave, ignoring Garrett's frown at the breach of protocol. "Remember, no matter what anyone tells you, you matter." As he rode away, Amina stood frozen in place, his words echoing in her mind. "You matter." When was the last time anyone had said something like that to her? When was the last time she'd believed it? But McCallister's brief presence had done something dangerous. It had reminded her that there were people in the world who saw her as human, and that reminder made her current situation even more unbearable. That night, as Garrett's heavy footsteps approached her door, Amina made a decision. She would endure this one more time, but she would also start preparing for something she'd almost given up on, escape that actually worked. Because somewhere out there was a man who'd looked at her and seen someone worth speaking to with kindness. And if such people existed, maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to reach them. Winter in New Mexico was harsh, but it brought Amina an unexpected gift. Work that took her away from the ranch house. The cattle needed hay hauled to distant pastures, and Garrett often sent her with the supply wagon, trusting that the desert's vastness would keep her from running. He was right, but not in the way he thought. On a bitter February morning, while delivering hay to the northern pasture, Amina witnessed something that would change everything. Hidden behind a rocky outcrop, she watched as Garrett met with 3 men she didn't recognize, hard-faced strangers who spoke in low, urgent tones about the silver shipment from Santa Fe and making sure there ain't no witnesses. The words territorial marshals been asking questions made her blood run cold. These weren't just ranchers discussing cattle prices. This was something far more dangerous, and she'd stumbled into the middle of it. As the men dispersed, Amina realized with growing horror that Garrett wasn't just a cruel master. He was part of something criminal, something that made her situation even more precarious. If he discovered she'd overheard this conversation, she wouldn't just face another beating. She'd disappear entirely. But the knowledge also gave her something she'd lacked before: leverage. And 3 days later, when Ethan McCallister rode up to the ranch again, she knew fate had handed her a chance she might never get again. This time, McCallister's visit wasn't casual. His badge caught the sunlight as he dismounted. He was wearing it openly now, and his manner was all business. "Mr. Garrett," he said, his voice carrying the authority of law, "I'm investigating some irregularities in silver shipments from the territorial mint. Mind if I ask you a few questions?" Amina, sweeping the porch nearby, saw Garrett's face go pale beneath his permanent tan. "Don't know nothing about no silver," he said, but his voice had lost its usual bluster. "That's funny," McCallister replied mildly, "because I got it on good authority that several prominent ranchers in this area have been meeting to discuss business opportunities. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" The conversation continued for several tense minutes, with Garrett's denials becoming increasingly desperate. But McCallister was clearly fishing. He suspected something but lacked concrete evidence. That's when Amina made the most dangerous decision of her life. "Excuse me, sir," she said quietly, stepping forward despite Garrett's furious glare. "Could I speak with you? About the silver?" The silence that followed was deafening. Garrett's hand moved instinctively toward the gun at his hip, but he couldn't draw on a territorial marshal without signing his own death warrant. McCallister's storm gray eyes sharpened with interest and something else, concern for her safety. "Girl, you get back to your work right now," Garrett snarled, but his voice shook with barely controlled rage. "No," Amina said, the word falling into the desert air like a stone into still water. "I won't." It was the first time in 8 months she'd directly defied him in front of a witness. The first time she'd claimed the right to speak for herself. And despite her terror, it felt like drawing her first real breath in nearly a year. McCallister stepped slightly between them, his posture casual but protective. "Ma'am," he said to Amina, "if you have information relevant to my investigation, I'd appreciate hearing it. And Mr. Garrett," his voice hardened, "I'd appreciate you letting the lady speak." Lady. He'd called her a lady, not girl, or property, or any of the other diminishing terms she'd grown accustomed to. The simple courtesy nearly undid her composure. Fighting to keep her voice steady, Amina recounted what she'd overheard at the northern pasture. The dates, the names she'd caught, the references to silver shipments and eliminating witnesses. As she spoke, she saw Garrett's face transform from rage to something far more dangerous: calculation. When she finished, McCallister nodded grimly. "Thank you, ma'am. That's very helpful." He turned to Garrett, whose hand was now resting openly on his gun. "Samuel Garrett, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit robbery and—" The gunshot cracked across the desert like thunder. Garrett had drawn faster than Amina would have thought possible, but McCallister was faster. The territorial marshals shot took Garrett center mass, dropping him to the dirt where he writhed, clutching his chest and gasping like a landed fish. "Should have just come quietly," McCallister said, holstering his weapon with practiced ease. But Amina saw his hand shake slightly as he knelt to check Garrett's wound. "You'll live, but you're gonna wish you hadn't." As McCallister bound Garrett's wound and prepared to transport him to Santa Fe for trial, he turned to Amina with an expression of deep concern. "Ma'am, I need to ask, are you safe here? Is there somewhere you can go?" The question hung in the air between them. Where could she go? She had no money, no family, no legal status that would protect her. In the eyes of the law, she was still technically Garrett's property, purchased in what amounted to a legal transaction. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. McCallister studied her face, the fading bruises, the hollow cheeks, the way she held herself like someone expecting another blow. "What's your name?" he asked gently. Amina, she said, and the sound of her own name on her lips felt like reclaiming something sacred. Amina, he repeated, giving it the proper pronunciation instead of the butchered version she'd grown used to hearing. That's a beautiful name. Listen to me carefully. You don't belong to him. You don't belong to anyone. You understand? The law may be complicated about arrangements like this, but morally, ethically, you belong to no one but yourself. The words hit her like a physical force. You belong to no one but yourself. After months of being treated like livestock, like property to be used and discarded, here was a man telling her the truth she'd almost forgotten. She was a human being with inherent worth and the right to determine her own fate. But practically speaking, McCallister continued, you need protection and a place to stay while we sort this out. I know a woman in Santa Fe, runs a boarding house for women in difficult circumstances. She's helped folks in situations like yours before. What about Martha? Amina asked, glancing toward the house where Garrett's wife had been hiding since the gunshots started. McCallister's expression hardened. Martha knew what was happening to you. She made her choice. Now you get to make yours. For the first time in 8 months, Amina had a choice to make. She could stay, accepting whatever legal complications might arise from Garrett's arrest. She could try to survive on her own in a territory that offered little protection for young women, especially foreign ones. Or she could trust this gray-eyed stranger who'd called her lady and told her she belonged to herself. I'll come with you, she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. As she gathered her few possessions, Amina felt something she'd thought was lost forever. Hope, not the naive hope of childhood, but the hard-earned hope of someone who'd survived the worst and chosen to keep fighting. But even as relief flooded through her, she knew this was only the beginning. Freedom, she was learning, wasn't just about escaping your captors. It was about learning to believe you deserved to be free. The boarding house in Santa Fe was nothing like the ranch. Run by a steel-haired Irish woman named Bridget O'Malley, it housed women who'd fled abusive husbands, former saloon girls trying to build respectable lives, and immigrants struggling to find their footing in American society. For the first time since her parents' death, Amina was surrounded by people who understood survival. The first thing you need to know, Bridget told her on that first evening, is that whatever happened to you before don't define who you are now. You get to write your own story from here on out. But writing your own story, Amina discovered, was harder than it sounded when you'd spent months being told you didn't matter. Even in the safety of the boarding house, she found herself flinching when doors slammed, asking permission to take a second helping at dinner, apologizing for taking up space. The other women noticed. Sarah, a former dance hall girl working as a seamstress, started teaching Amina to read English better. Maria, who'd fled an arranged marriage in Mexico, showed her how to style her hair in ways that made her feel beautiful instead of merely functional. And slowly, gradually, Amina began to remember who she was beneath the fear. Ethan McCallister visited regularly, ostensibly to check on her welfare as she prepared to testify in Garrett's trial. But Amina suspected there was more to it than legal obligation. The way he looked at her, with respect, with genuine interest in her thoughts and opinions, was unlike anything she'd experienced with a man. You're stronger than you know, he told her one afternoon as they walked through the plaza, carefully chaperoned by Bridget's watchful eye. What you did, speaking up against Garrett, that took real courage. I was terrified, Amina admitted. Courage isn't the absence of fear, McCallister replied. It's doing what's right despite being afraid. And you did that. Their conversations ranged from the serious to the mundane, her memories of her parents, his experiences as a territorial marshal, their shared love of books, her dreams of perhaps teaching children someday. For the first time in her life, Amina felt like someone was genuinely interested in her thoughts, rather than just her usefulness. But their growing closeness wasn't without complications. The territorial legislature was debating new laws about immigrant rights and labor contracts. While Garrett's criminal activities had voided any legal claim he might have had over Amina, her status remained precarious. She was a foreign-born woman with no male relatives to speak for her, no property, and no established trade. There's talk of deportation laws, McCallister told her grimly one evening. Politicians in Washington are getting nervous about immigrants, especially from the Middle East. You might not be safe here much longer. The threat of being sent back to Syria, where she had no family left and would be seen as a ruined woman, terrified Amina more than anything Garrett had done to her. But it also crystallized something important. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building a life worth fighting for. "Then I need to become legal," she said with determination that surprised them both. "What do I need to do?" The answer, it turned out, was marriage to an American citizen. It was a practical solution to a legal problem, but the idea of entering another arrangement where she might lose her autonomy made Amina's skin crawl. That's when Ethan McCallister made the most unexpected proposal of her life. "Marry me," he said during one of their walks, his voice steady but his hands trembling slightly. "Not because you have to, but because I love you, and because I want to spend my life making sure no one ever treats you as less than the remarkable woman you are." Amina stopped walking, staring at him in shock. "Ethan, I know it's complicated," he continued quickly. "I know you've been through hell, and the last thing you need is another man trying to claim ownership of you. But this wouldn't be like that. This would be a partnership between equals. You'd have your own money, your own choices, your own life. I'd just be honored to share it." The proposal was everything the arrangement with Garrett hadn't been: respectful, voluntary, and built on genuine affection rather than exploitation. But Amina found herself hesitating, not because she didn't care for Ethan, but because accepting felt like admitting she couldn't survive on her own. "I need time to think," she said. "Of course," Ethan replied. "Take all the time you need. Just know that whatever you decide, I'll respect it, and I'll help you fight the deportation threat either way." That night, Amina sat in her small room at the boarding house and tried to imagine her future. She could marry Ethan and find safety in legal protection and genuine partnership. She could try to make it on her own and risk deportation or worse. Or the third option came to her gradually as she remembered her mother's stories about strong women who'd forged their own paths. Women who'd refused to let society's limitations define their possibilities. The next morning, she found Ethan at the territorial courthouse and surprised him with her answer. "I'll marry you," she said, "but on one condition." "Anything," he replied immediately. "I want to become a teacher. I want to open a school for immigrant children, kids who don't speak English well, who get left behind by the regular schools. Will you support that?" Ethan's smile was brighter than the New Mexico sun. "Amina Hassani," he said, using her full name with the respect it deserved. "I wouldn't have you any other way." Their wedding was small but joyful, held in the boarding house parlor with the other women as witnesses and Bridget officiating as a justice of the peace. Amina wore a dress Sarah had sewn for her, simple but elegant, and flowers Maria had braided into her hair. But the most meaningful moment came when Ethan repeated the vows they'd written together. "I promise to honor your independence, support your dreams, and never forget that you belong to no one but yourself." As they exchanged rings, simple bands that represented partnership rather than ownership, Amina felt the last chains of her captivity finally fall away. She was no longer the girl who'd been sold like property. She was Amina McCallister, teacher, wife, and most importantly, a woman who belonged entirely to herself. 5 years later, the Amina McCallister School for New Americans was the pride of Santa Fe, serving immigrant children from across the territory. Amina had become fluent in Spanish and was learning French from a family of refugees from Louisiana. Her students adored her because she understood what it meant to feel foreign and unwelcome, and she made sure every child in her classroom knew they mattered. Ethan had kept his promise completely, supporting her dreams, respecting her autonomy, and never trying to control or diminish her. Their marriage had grown from mutual respect into deep, abiding love, the kind built on shared values rather than desperation. But perhaps the most remarkable change was in Amina herself. The frightened, broken girl who'd been sold by her uncle was gone, replaced by a confident woman who spoke her mind, fought for her students, and never forgot where she'd come from. On quiet evenings, when the desert wind whispered through the cottonwoods outside their home, Amina would sometimes remember that terrible day when Garrett had told her she belonged to him. The memory no longer had the power to hurt her, because she knew the truth now. The truth Ethan had spoken, and she'd finally learned to believe. She belonged to no one but herself. And that belonging, that fundamental ownership of her own life, her own choices, her own future, was worth more than all the land and cattle in the territory. In a world that still too often treated women as property, Amina McCallister stood as living proof that the human spirit, once freed, could not be caged again. She'd been sold like property, but she'd learned to save herself. And in doing so, she discovered that freedom wasn't something someone else could give you. It was something you had to claim for yourself, every single day. Would you have made the same choices as Amina? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Here on the channel, we tell stories like this, real, raw, and transformative. If you want to hear more, turn on the bell and come with us.